The air in our living room turned arctic the second my wife Elena tossed the thick, white envelope onto the coffee table. It didn't slide. It landed with a heavy, final thud that echoed through the entire house. "Sign them," she said. Her voice didn't shake. There were no tears, no dramatic screams, just a cold, calculated stillness that terrified me more than any shouting match ever could. I looked down. In bold, aggressive lettering, the front page stared back at me, "Petition for dissolution of marriage." My chest tightened as a surge of pure adrenaline overrode my senses. Elena was 6 months pregnant with our first child. Just 2 weeks ago, we were painting the nursery, talking about the future, and picking out names. But that was before Chloe, my first love, unexpectedly crawled back out of the past, dripping with toxic intent. In less than 14 days, a ghost from my history had systematically dismantled a 5-year marriage, spinning a web of lies so venomous that my pregnant wife now looked at me like I was a monster. Elena thought my silence over the last few days meant guilt. She expected me to beg, to panic, or to break down. She was wrong. I didn't trace the paperwork, and I didn't raise my voice. Just like Justice Valley, I don't operate on wild assumptions. I operate on cold, hard reality. As I looked into Elena's frozen eyes, I knew the reckoning had just begun. 5 years. That is how long Elena and I spent building an unbreakable foundation. Our marriage wasn't just stable, it was a sanctuary, especially after we found out we were finally expecting. But the beautiful narrative we created became a direct target the moment Chloe materialized back into my life. She didn't storm in, she slithered, using a mutual friend's sudden emergency as a green light to breach my boundaries. At first, it was just professional text messages, dripping with a calculated, desperate need for advice. I kept quiet to keep the peace, believing that if I ignored her relentless ego, she'd eventually lose interest. I was entirely wrong. My silence was interpreted as weakness, a green light for her to escalate. Chloe started executing a highly sophisticated campaign of psychological sabotage. She left intentional, microscopic breadcrumbs designed to trigger a pregnant woman's deepest anxieties. A lingering scent of a perfume left on a borrowed file, a late-night text flashing on my screen with insidious nostalgia, and subtle, poisonous whispers passed through mutual acquaintances to ensure Elena heard them. Chloe treated our lives like a high-stakes competition she was determined to win, weaving a web of subtle manipulation to paint me as an unfaithful partner while she played the innocent bystander. I watched her insidious jabs slowly chip away at my wife's peace of mind, completely misjudging how deep Chloe's toxic entitlement truly ran. The tension in our home reached a breaking point on a rainy Tuesday evening, the heavy silence before a massive hurricane. Chloe decided to play her final, most desperate card to shatter my family completely. Using a heavily doctored, cropped audio file from an old conversation years ago, she edited the clip to make it sound like I was planning a secret rendezvous with her behind my wife's back. She sent the file directly to Elena's phone, accompanied by a toxic message, "He never truly stopped loving me." The emotional strike was calculated to destroy. Instead of erupting into a screaming match, Elena went completely numb. The shock in her eyes was palpable. She didn't yell, she didn't demand an explanation. With terrifying, frozen precision, she quietly walked upstairs, packed her bags, and placed the divorce papers on the table. She looked at me with cold, judgmental eyes that closed me out entirely, believing the narrative Chloe had beautifully manufactured. But Chloe made a fatal mistake. She mistook my initial shock for total defeat. The second the front door clicked shut behind Elena, a surge of pure adrenaline overrode my panic. I didn't waste time begging or spiraling into despair. I switched into a cold, analytical mindset. I pulled up my laptop, bypassed Chloe's superficial digital camouflage, and began systematically tracing the metadata of that audio file. The reckoning wasn't just coming, it was already in motion. 48 hours later, the trap was sprung. I arranged a meeting at a quiet, upscale restaurant under the pretense that I was finally ready to leave Elena and move forward. Chloe arrived looking smug, her giant ego practically radiating across the room as she wore a mask of total victory. She genuinely believed she had dismantled my entire life and won the ultimate prize. But I was already 2 steps ahead of her theatrics. Instead of ordering food, I pulled my laptop from my bag with surgical precision. I didn't need to raise my voice or cause a scene. I simply opened the master folder I had spent the last 2 days quietly curating. With one click, I cast my screen to the digital monitor mounted right beside our table and hit play. The unedited, raw audio files filled the space, instantly followed by the clear metadata logs proving she had intentionally manipulated the timestamps. Chloe's face went instantly breathless and shocked. The color drained from her skin as the reality of her own suffocating, toxic entitlement echoed back at her. Her narrative of superiority shattered into absolute ruins. What she didn't know was that Elena, along with our legal counsel, was listening to every single second via live, secure audio feed. Chloe started stammering, desperately trying to play the victim, but the proof was too damning. The courtroom was set, and she was the sole defendant. The heavy silence that followed Chloe's exposure wasn't just quiet, it was lethal. The perfect, superior facade she had spent weeks building was entirely shredded in a matter of seconds. Elena stepped out from the adjoining room, her face a mask of cold fury as she looked at the monster who had tried to destroy her family. The legal counsel handed Chloe a formal cease and desist order alongside a defamation lawsuit. Realizing she had been utterly exposed and cornered, Chloe grabbed her bag and stormed out of the restaurant, hoping someone would follow. Not a single person moved. She left entirely alone, finally facing the hollow reality of her own malicious actions. Elena's trust in me wasn't rebuilt through empty, desperate promises, but through the cold, undeniable truth I had uncovered. Our bond emerged stronger, protected by an ironclad boundary that no ghost from the past could ever breach again. I saw Chloe months later walking through a crowded downtown square. She looked remarkably small, older, and tired compared to the giant ego she once carried. She stopped and looked directly at me, expecting a confrontation or perhaps a spark of lingering anger. I simply walked right past her without a single flicker of recognition. That was the ultimate victory. Knowing she no longer possessed the power to affect my wife, my unborn child, or my peace of mind. She was forced to live permanently in the quiet consequence of her own hubris, a complete ghost in her own life.